bacteria.
That when we start talking about because this is talking about organs, now we haven't really started talking about disease. So this is talking about the organs. But if we were going to talk about viruses, for example, the planet that rules viruses is Neptune. And it has a very, well, if we wanted to get into it esoterically, it's pretty far out. Viruses really became a significant issue in human evolution from the period of 1830 to 1870. And it directly relates to what is esoterically and occultly known as the war in heaven. And it had to do with a time where it became essential that a whole hierarchy of dark beings, dark, negative, evil beings, had to be cleared out of the spiritual worlds by Archangel Michael. And the war actually lasted from 1830 to 1870. This is literally a war in the spiritual world. And in 1870, these beings got cleared out and thrown down to earth. Corresponding with the karma of these beings and their influence, it manifested in two different ways. Very interesting correspondences. Because on one level, not that there wasn't greed before. There's always been greed. There's always been these things. But now it became a major evolutionary issue that the being that was the head of these dark angels and these dark beings was known as Mammon. How many of you have heard of this name, this term, Mammon, the god of Mammon? You know, the statement from the Bible, you can worship Mammon or you can worship God. What does Mammon mean? It means money and wealth. It means greed, if we want to talk about a quality of consciousness. Greed, all of us want to be comfortable, but I don't think most of us would fall into the category of greed. We're talking about an extremeness, an obsession with wealth, an imbalance that is very dark and dysfunctional. Because when you get gripped by greed or mammon, you don't really care what you do to other people because the obsessiveness and the drive to acquire money and to have vast amounts of wealth rules everything in your life. Greed's always been there, but it's never been in human evolution with the force and power that it does now. It began in 1870 when these beings were thrown down to the earth, and the corresponding physiological result of it was viruses. The microbial life at this very minute level of life that we know of as the virus, and it wasn't that viruses didn't exist before, but you will now find beginning in 1870 that viruses and viral epidemics start taking on a role of insidious, at a micro level of your physiology, disturbing one's health and balance. To where today, one of the things that's been going on, if we understand transits, and this has actually been going on for the last couple of years, is that the planet Saturn and the planet Neptune by transit have been in opposition with each other. Saturn in Leo, Neptune in Aquarius for the last couple of years. And I've been watching because this is a classic astrological influence for viral epidemics or those kinds of health issues at a collective level that really can be very insidious. You know, where the Department of Health is concerned about pandemics and all this. Well, this particular configuration of planets rules pandemics. And we've seen the bird flu, we've seen evolutions of some of these things that are happening that are starting to spread throughout the world, not basically because we are a global society and a global civilization, whereas before, when there wasn't so much communication and interaction between nations and peoples, a lot of this stuff stayed isolated. No more. This is stuff now, if something breaks out, it's worldwide. And Neptune is the planet that rules these kinds of things, and it increasingly will. And it has to do with addressing, and you watch it correspondingly with the issue of greed and imbalance of wealth within society. Where the concentrations of wealth, you're going to find that those individuals, when we talk about our culture and civilization, when I lived in LA, the most popular bumper sticker on people's cars was, "He with the most toys wins." Well, this is a philosophy of materialism. This is an emphasis that the values of the society are primarily about materialism and material acquisitions and wealth and toys and the things that they can buy. We're going to find that the more materialistic the culture becomes, that correspondingly an insidious physiological counterpart to it at a microbial level, at this very fine level, are viruses. And it's directly related to the god Mammon. So are you going to find that in the medical books at Harvard? No.
They're stronger and they mutate and they don't...
Well, that's part of this thing with the bird flu and stuff. Something that's in the animal kingdom that's actually being transferred to the human kingdom. The metamorphosis, usually there's a whole separation between the animal kingdom and the human kingdom from the standpoint of these kind of viruses, where animals can have all these viruses, we won't get them. We'll have these viruses, animals don't get them. But we're getting to a point where they're jumping from the animal kingdom to the human kingdom. That's a phenomenon that we got to watch out for.
Would you say that since Neptune is in Aquarius, that this relates to a bird type of flu with the element of air?
Oh, it can.
Also these contrails.
The contrails, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you're aware of the contrails. Yeah. That's a little different. That is Neptune on another level, but it's more about Saturn. It's about control. It's about the secret government. It's about basic mind control and trying to, yeah. That's a little different.
Well, I was just thinking of it is in the air.
Yeah. Well, there's that, but also think from the standpoint, I mean, Neptune is what rules AIDS. When we start looking at some of the things that have developed in recent times from the standpoint of health issues, that this is, again, these mysterious kinds of things. I mean, Saturn rules cancer, that's different. But these new diseases that are coming online, this is related to Neptune.
Well, viruses are thought...
Yeah. Right. That's exactly what it is. And so these are all spiritual issues. Well, what does Mammon have to do with it? It's about materialism. Here is this setup of this conflict between spirituality and materiality that's actually manifesting as health epidemics.
Is that greed and power?
Well, it's greed. You can connect power to it, but if we want to keep it in its pure form, it's just greed. Okay? So whoever asked that question, it was a great question. Because there's so much to this. I mean, again, like most of the classes, we could go on for many, many classes really getting into depth about the nuances of all of this. Our goal in this first class is just to get a basic framework of understanding of health through your natal chart. The ability to see when potential health issues, to see what our chronic issues are and where the weak parts are in our physiology and our health, and also be able to calculate the timing of a crisis. Because that is then when we bring in the transits and the progressions. This is what we were born with. It's like we could say that, in my case, in certain respects, say I go and live in Asia for a while, and I pick up a bunch of bugs. Well, some of those bugs may manifest and I deal with them while I'm living in Asia, but some may incubate and not really manifest. And I come back home after years, and it doesn't actually manifest as a health issue until it's activated by a transit. And this, you have to understand, inside of us are teeming worlds of beings and life forms. So where it shows in our negative aspects in our chart are our greatest susceptibilities from a health standpoint. And then that's there, that's dormant, that's latent, that's there, and it doesn't get activated until a transiting planet comes around and activates it. And that would be when we'd get sick, or we'd go in the hospital, or when, in one form or another it would manifest. And there's all kinds of things. If it's Saturn's involved, it's more chronic. If Uranus and Mars are involved, it's more acute. It comes quickly and goes quickly. There's just a whole world. Once you start analyzing the chart and what's involved, you can just layer all kinds of levels of information. Joanna?
Focus on your area.
Oh, well, I'll give you an example. I mean, just myself. I mean, I have my moon in Capricorn in my 6th house of health, and we haven't gotten into houses yet, which we're going to. It has nothing but negative aspects to it. Nothing. It has no positive aspects whatsoever. Saturn's opposing it, Neptune's squaring it. And I've all my life had digestive issues. Moon rules the stomach, rules digestion. And there's all kinds of reasons for it. Saturn is blockage, which opposes it. Neptune relates to these kinds of things that I'm talking about, where I could get into. It rules poisoning. I was poisoned twice in Asia. I mean, purposely, intentionally, not accidentally. It's actually a way of killing. It rules viruses, it rules poisoning, it rules these subtle, insidious things that come through. And energetically, Saturn is going to shut down or restrict or block the functioning of the stomach, or the ability to assimilate out of the stomach, the nutrition that we need. So this is a real issue, and because Saturn is involved, it's chronic, meaning most likely, it's something you better learn to work with, because it can only get worse if you neglect it, and it will get better, but it's most likely. It doesn't mean, and understand the principle, because there's nothing that can't be healed, and there's no question that I've healed myself and I've transformed myself. But when Saturn's involved, it tends to be chronic, which means it's very difficult to get rid of, and there's a good chance it'll be there your whole life, and you have to develop a lifestyle that every day is counteracting that influence. And if you get lax and you're not disciplined, and you don't do that, you're going to be miserable, and you can die.
You can't.
No. In fact, that's an excellent question. You don't want to wait for a crisis.
So you can, even though it hasn't been activated in your body, you can still work on it.
By looking at a person's chart, I can tell them what the issues are and how to work with it in consciousness and in physiology. That also is what brings up the mineral kingdom and the plant kingdom in terms of bringing in those energies to counteract that in terms of those energies. Where it's strength, where it's weak, we can make it strong. Where it's too strong, we can moderate it. Where there's too much energy, we can mitigate it. And there's two principles. You can work with the opposite energy, and you have to evaluate in the chart how to do that. But you can work with the opposite energy. For example, the opposite of Saturn is Jupiter. So here, and that's actually the liver as opposed to the spleen. And it's by working with Jupiter, it will help to put Saturn back in its place. And also Uranus is the antithesis of Saturn too. And so here, understanding what these planets are, what these energies are, what these functions are, and also correspondingly in the plant kingdom and the mineral kingdom, what these energies represent, bringing these into yourself in various ways helps to heal the situation. But again, as we've already said, the primary understanding that is essential is that the physiological issue represents an issue in consciousness. And meditation is the best way. There's no question. It's the universal panacea. It is the healer of everything. And so that in and of itself, to the degree that we're meditating on a regular basis, you're going to find that is an essential part of true, genuine healing, no matter what the issue is. But in addition to that, there would be, Saturn has to do with fear. So one of the things would be consciously developing courage, consciously developing the ability to face our fears and work through them, come out the other side. Not deny them, not to avoid them, not to do this, but actually get strong through facing our fears and working with our fears and dealing with our fears. That's going at a consciousness level to the source of the problem, because the fear is what's constricting the functioning. The principle of Saturn is constriction. And so, in a certain respect, in your case there, it's the heart. And so if we actually face those fears and deal with those fears, and we come out the other side, with every one of those encounters, you're releasing the hold of Saturn. You're weakening it, and you're strengthening yourself. And that is, I mean, that's dealing with the problem on the level of the problem, even though there's all kinds of other ways to do it. So every one of these planets relates to a virtue, a quality of consciousness. And that will say, well, okay, we've got to develop more courage here. We've got to, these kinds of things. And it will show you even what areas of life that the issue is most prominently going to come up and how to deal with it. So self-sabotaging, self-destructive patterns of thinking and of feeling and of action. Every health issue is the manifestation of some part of yourself of self-sabotaging, self-destructive patterns of thinking, feeling, and action. And it means it's gotten to the point where we've ignored it or not dealt with it or not fixed it enough to where it is manifesting physiologically, so we can't ignore it anymore. Because we feel pretty miserable when we're sick. It should be getting our attention that we are in crisis. There's something here that needs to be dealt with, but we confuse it. Most people think, well, it's just a physical issue. No, it isn't. And the other thing that our health system has created is the ability to mask these symptoms. Here, take a drug. Does that heal? No. It just masks the symptoms. It actually pushes the issue deeper. And I'm not saying don't take drugs, because there are times it's very important to do that. It buys you the time to work on the issue. There's all kinds of things. But understand, those drugs are not healing anything.
Well, it doesn't pay, but I mean, it's like the dark side and the light side.
Well, it is. But I mean, in a functional, if I just looked at it from a business standpoint, because I worked in in investment banking, I raised hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars for the healthcare industry, and it's structured for disease. It's structured for medical crises. It's structured. What pays is dealing with all of this stuff. So they don't, in a big sense, it's like if you have cancer, it's not about healing cancer, it's about treating cancer. If you have AIDS, it's not about healing AIDS, it's about treating AIDS. What's the difference? That's an ongoing program of treatment where there's a constant cash flow stream that's coming back to the doctors and the hospitals and everything else. That is the basis of how they look at it.
It's really hard to convince thought process.
But it's the thing that we need to realize. It's our personal responsibility to be healed. And in fact, it is about preventative medicine. I mean, that's exactly, Joanna, what you were saying. No, we don't want to wait for a crisis. If we see that there's a potential issue here, let's start getting well now, so that when this does get activated, we actually are that much further down the road of it getting fixed, which means the crisis itself is going to be much less.
We can recognize it too.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things, just to give you a certain idea, this was in ancient China. And the relationship between the doctor and the patient was one where the patient paid the doctor to keep them well. And if they got sick, the doctor failed, and there was no charge for treatment. It was the exact reverse. It was the exact reverse of our system. And that was the traditional basis of Chinese medicine, is I'll pay you to keep me well. But if I get sick, you failed, I failed, and you treat me and get me well, but I don't pay you for that. I only pay you for keeping me well. It was a totally opposite paradigm, view of what life is supposed to be like, and big difference in terms of quality of life.
They take your spleen out all the time.
Do they?
Yeah.
And so what would be, well, no, there's an etheric. Understand, when we do surgery,
yeah.
When they take a part of your body out, a physical part of your body, the etheric part's still there. I'm not saying that's a good thing to take the body parts out. It isn't,
right.
But that's why you can still survive.
Right. The spleen, I mean, they just talk about, you live without the spleen, and some people don't really notice.
Yeah. What would be a disease, a health diagnosis in which a doctor would recommend cutting out the spleen? What would be the symptom? What would
a rupture, an injury.
To the spleen itself?
Yeah, usually like
Okay, so it's a direct. Oh, okay.
No, I don't think they keep the spleen out.
Okay. Yeah, because I
The spleen isn't talked about very much in medicine. You don't hear
Yeah.
a lot about the spleen, but to me it's diseases of
Yeah.
Well, it's the immune system too.
Well, then that would, okay, then that would be big. But Saturn, from another standpoint, it's very big because it's the planet of karma, and the spleen is its manifestation physiologically. And it relates to the I am and the blood, and the blood is the carrier of this. And then again, you say immunization, the ability of self to battle the not self, the ability to battle the invasions. It's the battle of light and darkness. And to the degree the self and the blood is weak, then it will be overwhelmed by all of the other stuff. And you're going to find physiologically the body's compromised, consciousness-wise, the sense of self is compromised. So it becomes, it is very significant. I'd have to look into that a little bit more because I'm not as familiar with it. But again, the planet that rules the blood is Mars. And it is the fighter in you. It's the warrior in you. It's the planet of action. So when we start compromising the quality of the blood and the quality of the sense of self, we're going to find that the ability for you to protect yourself and to fight against all of that which is adversarial is weakened, to where you're basically compromised, to where life or death or however you want is really going to take over, is going to defeat you.
On a Pluto transit on Mars.
See, Pluto would be huge, absolutely. Because Pluto is intense. Saturn and Pluto are the most malefic from the standpoint of transits. And the thing about both of them is that their transit is going to last a long time. So when you have a crisis that's activated by transiting Saturn, it will minimally usually last 12 months. Pluto,
it's years.
Yeah, it's years. Because Pluto only moves 2 degrees a year. And so it can last. And so these are the kind of things, when you see those coming, from we can see, oh wow, there's a Saturn transit that's going to be activating this in a while, or Pluto transit going to be activating this. We want to get it together in terms of really trying to get healthy and strong before that happens, because the intensity of that kind of a health crisis is going to be one of the worst kind. It's going to test us.